so we got 2 apples. For 4 people, we're gonna just have these. Great recipe and very fast. And these are super, super easy things to find in the grocery store. I mean, come on, apples. And I love these apples because we're gonna bake these in the oven. They're gonna really hold up for us. All right, so slice them across the equator, like I like to call them. And then just take like a little spoon or a scooper and get the seeds out right there. All right, that one's good to go. Because in the middle, we're gonna drop some jelly. All right, so those apples, I don't want them to brown because we're gonna make the crisp topping. So just take a little piece of lemon off and squeeze and rub. This is great for kids too, they'll like this. This is really simple. You can do it on the weekend, make it really special. All right, in the center, just a little scoop of jelly. When it cooks, it's gonna just kind of start distributing through the apple and just give it a little extra sweetness. I'm always trying to add that extra layer of flavor. All right, so a little bit of flour, some quick oats. This is so easy, I love this. And you know what, it's not just apples. You can do a lot of fruits with this. Peaches, and put it on top of all kinds of things. A little bit of brown sugar here. Let's see if I can get that out. All right, some brown sugar. And then in a second, we're gonna get our hands dirty, which is why I said this is really good for the kids. They might like to help you out with this. I like to do this as an adult, so you know how it is. You get in the kitchen and you just start having fun. All right, and where's my cinnamon? A little bit of ground cinnamon, always good with apples. Apples and cinnamon. Tastes good in my oatmeal in the morning. It's gonna taste good in my dessert right now. All right, throw our butter in there. And then just a pinch of salt. Always helps bring the sweetness out in a dessert. All right, the dirty part. Mix it in really good. Oh yeah, it smells like it's supposed to smell right now too. It smells like I've already made it. The good thing about this dish as well too is, man, it's gonna make your house smell great. You know when you go to the grocery store and you find the candles and the potpourri, they always say apples and cinnamon, right? Come on. You've got the potpourri and the full belly with this dish. All right, so this is all looking good here, everything incorporated. I like just kind of make a big ball out of it, make sure all the butter is mixed in. Then we're just gonna start topping these off. All right, put one there. Just work it in. Try and make sure you keep the jelly in the pocket. It's real important. Okay. Some escapes, no big deal. The baked apples, fresh out of the oven, crunchy top, juicy apple, and that little dollop of jelly that's on the inside. It's like the surprise when you crack it open. It's gonna be so good for dessert.
I'm peeling 1 pink lady and I have 2 green apples. The pink lady is nice and sweet. The Granny Smith is a little tart. It just works perfectly in this recipe. But any apples you have will work. All right, so I've got my apples peeled. Now I'm gonna core them, then dice. During my professional career in cooking, I have not always enjoyed baking. Kind of shied away from baking early on. I just thought it was a little intimidating, but I found that there were a lot of baking recipes that weren't as intimidating as I thought. This is one of those recipes. After I get these apples in a bowl, I'm gonna get started on my dry and my wet. I'm using 3 cups of flour, 1 teaspoon of baking soda, a ½ teaspoon of salt, 2 teaspoons of cinnamon. Apple and cinnamon go hand in hand. I'm grating up some nutmeg, give you that intense nutmeg flavor. I can already smell it. Put that to the side. Get started on my wet. A ½ cup of dark brown sugar. I want more of a molasses flavor, so I'm using dark. 2 cups of white sugar, granulated sugar. 1½ cups of canola oil or vegetable, as long as it's a neutral oil. Now this is a very dense and heavy cake, so that's why I'm using oil instead of using like room temp or whipped butter. So next I'm gonna add some vanilla, 2 teaspoons or 2 capfuls. 3 eggs into this bowl first because I don't want any shells in that cake. Mix that in there. Get my hand mixer on. I like baking oil-based cakes because if you let it sit out at room temp, it lasts for days and days. That cake stays moist forever. I'm gonna put the flour in a little bit at a time. and give it a mix. Give it a mix. All right, that looks good. Fold in the apples. These are really big chunks. You're gonna get a big bite of apple in every slice. I have a bundt pan that I buttered and floured. This is gonna help the cake come right on out once it cools. Now I'm just gonna evenly distribute the batter directly into this pan. Of course, bang it on a table because I wanna make sure there are no pockets of air. I want the cake to bake nice and evenly. So I have my oven preheated to 325. I'm gonna bake this for 60 to 75 minutes. It depends on your oven. I know this cake will be ready when I insert a little toothpick. Comes out clean. Ooh, that cinnamon, that apple. Oh my goodness. Oh, it is so pretty. I'm going to get started on melting my caramel for the cake. So this pot, I have 11 ounces of caramel. I'm going to add about 1/4 cup of whole milk. That is definitely cool enough now. Pour it directly on my cake. It is gorgeous.
I'm gonna bake some apples. We're gonna brush it with some cinnamon and some sugar, and we're gonna fill it with Irish oatmeal, and then we're gonna dollop a little Greek yogurt on top. Let's quickly make a mixture of some butter, some brown sugar, and some cinnamon. You know exactly what this tastes like, right? It's gonna have that sort of molasses flavor from the brown sugar. It's gonna be nice and rich and buttery from the butter, and a little bit of cinnamon. Apples and cinnamon, I mean, I think they were born together. Just gonna put a pinch of salt, and I think I'm gonna put like a tiny bit of black pepper in there too. And while we're waiting for that to melt, I'm gonna prep my apples. So I'm gonna take the top off the apple, and I'm gonna take the bottom off. The bottom is actually just so it kind of stands up like that. And I'm gonna take a melon baller and just hollow out the middle of the apple. Make sure you get all the seeds out. And the top of the apple, we're gonna save. I'm actually gonna dice that up and put that into the oatmeal. Now I'm gonna brush the brown sugar and the cinnamon and the butter to really kind of flavor the apples. These flavors do not surprise anyone, I'm sure. But I love this technique of baking the apples. I'm gonna just take some apple cider and put it in the bottom of my pan. And we're really kind of braising the apples. You know, it's gonna create steam and the apples are gonna bake. They're gonna get nice and soft and tender. I'm gonna cover it with some aluminum foil. So I have my oven set for 375 degrees for about a half an hour. I'm gonna let those bake. Okay. We have some milk that I've scalded, and I have some Irish oats, and I'm gonna slowly just put a stream of the oats into the milk, just as it starts to boil. And these are quick oats, so it should only take about, 5 to 7 minutes. As the oats cook, it's gonna flour and it's going to thicken. I'm gonna add some brown sugar. Wanna make sure you're constantly whisking this. We don't want lumpy oatmeal. Some beautiful orange zest. And now I'm gonna take my apples. I wanna put the apples sort of at the end, because I don't want them to get too mealy. I want them to save some of their texture. Let's give this a taste. See if we need some more sugar. Needs to cook just a little bit more. I'm not really into al dente oatmeal. All right, so we're gonna let this cook. Turn the heat down a little bit. I have the apples baking away in here. Look at that. The apples still have a little integrity to the texture. We don't want them sort of baking away into applesauce. I'm gonna take these out. I'm gonna spill out a little bit of that brown sugar and butter. Just leave a little bit in the bottom. Because remember, we're gonna fill these with our oatmeal. This is such a nice brunch dish, it really is. Very comforting, totally bed and breakfast-like, but in a very sophisticated way. I'm not gonna get rid of these beautiful apple juices that we have on the bottom of this pan, right? Because the cinnamon and the sugar, kind of spilled into there. So we're gonna put these in a pan, and we're gonna reduce this down to almost like a syrup. It's free sauce, because we didn't add anything else to it. We just took it from the bottom of the pan. And then I'll just take a spoon and glaze the apples right before I serve them. Grab a spoon, and we're gonna fill our apples with this oatmeal. A little bit of Greek yogurt. What's the Greek yogurt gonna do? Well, it's gonna give it sort of a creamy finish, of course, and the tanginess will work really nicely against the brown sugar and the cinnamon. We're just gonna glaze the apples right over the yogurt.
So I've already peeled and diced one small apple. I'm using a Honeycrisp apple. Dice up the Honeycrisp because these cups are pretty small, so you need small pieces to fit inside the cup. Got my apples cut up. I'm using phyllo cups. You've probably seen them in the freezer section. They're in the dessert aisle. I have my oven preheated to 350. These are already par-baked, so I'm just gonna pop them in the oven, get them a little bit more crispy, and that's only gonna take 5 minutes. While those go, I'm gonna cook these apples. My skillet is hot. I'm gonna add about a tablespoon of unsalted butter. Get that to melt. Drop the apples in the skillet. Apples have a lot of water, so what you need to do is pre-cook your apples to release some of that water. Otherwise, it's gonna have a really soupy pie. I'm gonna add my spices. Half a teaspoon of cinnamon. I'm gonna grate some fresh nutmeg. Freshly grated nutmeg has more of a pungent flavor, so you're gonna really taste that nutmeg in the pie. A pinch of salt, a teaspoon of lemon juice. Lemon juice helps to prevent your fruit from turning brown. So it's been about 5 minutes. I'm gonna take my phyllo cups out of the oven. I'm gonna sit that right there. Now I'm gonna add the brown sugar. So the brown sugar, of course, adds sweetness, a touch of molasses flavor. All right, so that looks good. I'm gonna make a little slurry. The slurry is a thickener. I'm using cornstarch, and I have 2 teaspoons of water in this little bowl here. So I'm gonna add 2 teaspoons of cornstarch. I'm gonna grab a fork to mix it up, making sure all of the cornstarch has dissolved. As soon as it hits that heat and that liquid and the sugar and everything just starts to come together, it makes a slurry. So I'm gonna turn my heat off now and add about a teaspoon of vanilla. Mix it up. All right, let this sit. I wanna get started on my crumbly topping. So I have a half a cup of whole wheat flour. I wanna add about a half a cup of rolled oats. I'm eyeballing this. A teaspoon of cinnamon. The same flavors that I used in my apple mixture, I'm gonna put inside the crumb too. A pinch of salt. It's gonna enhance the light brown sugar I'm using. I'm using a tablespoon of that. And a drizzle of honey. And I have a half a stick of butter. It wouldn't be a crumb without butter. Give it a mix. The oven is still on at 350 from when I had my phyllo cups in there. I'm gonna bake this on a cookie sheet here. I have lined with some parchment paper. So I'm gonna bake this for about 10 minutes. While this is baking, I'm gonna grab my apples, grab those cups, and fill them up. I'm so excited, not only because I get to see Katie, but these are just so cute, and I love entertaining. All right, so those are done. Let me grab my granola topping. I'm gonna add some almonds to the mixture. Now, the reason I didn't add almonds before I put it in the oven is because these things are so thin that they burn very quickly. Just a few pinches of almonds there. I'm gonna give it a mix. Okay, all right, and just gonna put that topping right on top. Oh, look at that. Oh, those are cute. I mean, I have so many here. She won't tell if I just take this one and eat it. I don't know if you can hear it, but this thing is crunchy. It's sweet. And get some of the snap from the apple because it's not like cooked down all the way. Fried pie, who? Look at these.
What are those?
Instead of making the deep fried hand pie that you get at the fast food joint you like going to, I decided to make a little miniature version of that, and I baked them instead of deep frying them. Ooh, wow. It's crunchy. It's still a little buttery.
I really love the filling. I love apple pie. I love it that they're so tiny. You can have as many as you want.
When I was at the farm stand and I saw all these gorgeous pears and apples, I thought, I've definitely got to make a pear and apple crisp for my barn warming. So I've got 2 pounds of Macoun apples. I've peeled them and diced them. And I've got 2 pounds of Basque pears, You can really choose any kind of apples that are firm and crisp. And you want pears that are firm also, but also sort of juicy. You can see when I peel them, they're just delicious. So, peel them, and then I'm gonna cut them in 3/4 inch dice. Take the cores out. It's a little bit of a messy job, but worth it. Okay, so that's 2 pounds of apples and 2 pounds of pears. And I'm gonna add cranberries, 3/4 of a cup of cranberries. They're dried cranberries, and I think they're really sort of autumnal and delicious in this. Now to give it lots of flavor, I'm gonna put in lemon zest and orange zest. About a teaspoon of lemon zest. A teaspoon of orange zest. I like to mix them because one's a little sweeter, one's a little tartar, and this way neither of them really overwhelm the pear flavor. And then some juice. You always want a little juice to mix with the flour and sugar, so it gives a nice sort of sauce when it's cooking. So about 2 teaspoons of orange juice, about 2 teaspoons of lemon juice. Okay. 1/2 cup of sugar, 1/4 cup of flour. That's just gonna sort of create that little, you know, that delicious goop in the middle. So when the juices of the pears and apples come out, it'll make a wonderful sauce for it. Okay, now some classic apple pie flavorings. A teaspoon of cinnamon, 1/2 teaspoon of nutmeg. So all of these enhance the pears and the apples, but none of them really overwhelm it. Just to bring out all that sort of gorgeous pear and appleness. Okay, so I think I'm gonna fill the ramekins. So I have 12 small ramekins. They're each an individual crisp. I think this is gonna be just delicious. I wanna fill them each a little high, because when they bake, you know, they sort of go down. So it's about a cup in each one. And now for the oatmeal crumble topping. Okay, 1½ cups of flour, 3/4 of a cup of light brown sugar, and 3/4 of a cup of granulated sugar. Okay, 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Salt's really important when you bake, really brings out the flavor. And 1 cup of oatmeal. It has great crunch and flavor. 1/2 pound of butter. I'm just gonna dice it and then mix it into the topping. Okay, and then I'm just gonna blend it all together. So you wanna let this go until it's like in big crumbles, which is right now. It's great, you can smell the cinnamon and nutmeg. Wonderful. Okay, so I'm just gonna pile this on each of the ramekins. Just big crumbles on the top of each one. And how good does that look? So I'm gonna put these in the fridge, and then later before the party, I'm gonna bake them 350 degrees for about 45 to 50 minutes until the top is browned and the juice and the fruit is all bubbly. Will you take a crisp and I'll get you a spoon?
I'm gonna make my roasted spiced chicken and apples, which is gonna be the centerpiece for the holiday table. To start off, I have some whole spices toasting in a dry skillet, and this just brings out their flavor. I've got some black pepper, cardamom, coriander, cumin, and cloves. Now that my spices are toasted, I'll pour them into my spice grinder to blend them up. Got a whiff of the cardamom. This looks perfect. And now I'm gonna combine this with a few more spices. I've got paprika, cinnamon, and nutmeg, and the paprika is gonna add great smokiness, and the cinnamon and nutmeg are gonna add awesome warmth. And this is my version of Baharat, which is an all-purpose Middle Eastern spice blend that is great on vegetables and meats. I think cinnamon in savory dishes is an underrated move. Next, I'll grate in some nutmeg. I kind of think of nutmeg as a smoother cinnamon. It just amps up the cinnamon. I'll give this a mix. Because I'm gonna add it directly to the chicken, I'm also gonna add a lot of salt. So I'll stir this in. So now I'm gonna sprinkle my spice and salt mixture all over the chicken. Make sure you get every nook and cranny. And I'm also gonna sprinkle some in the cavity of the chickens. Now these are gonna sit in the refrigerator overnight, uncovered, which will help the skin get crispy. Move over, holiday ham. These birds are my new holiday jam. Now I just need to roast them. But before I do that, I'm chopping up some apples and onions to scatter around the chickens. And as they roast, they're gonna soak up all of the juices from the chicken and get so delicious. I'm using Gala apples here. And now I'll quarter 2 onions. And these will also add a little sweetness. Now I'm ready to grab my chickens. My chickens were in the refrigerator overnight, but now I've let them come to room temperature, which will help them roast evenly. And now I'm gonna stuff the cavities with half my onions. And this will allow flavor to get into the chicken from the inside out. And I'm also gonna add some thyme and fresh rosemary. Oh, that's a good smell. And then I'll sprinkle the apples and the onions all around the edge. And now I'll add a couple of pinches of salt to the apples and onions. And then a little bit of sugar will enhance their sweetness. And lastly, a drizzle of olive oil will help the apples and the onions roast. I love the colors on this pan. Okay, these chickens are gonna roast now at 450 degrees for about an hour until the juices run clear. I think they're ready. Oh my goodness! And look at how crispy that skin looks. Oh, and I just got a whiff of that Baharat. I'm gonna carve them now, but first I wanna let them rest, and that allows the juices to redistribute. So I'll transfer them to the cutting board first. And I'll finish off the apples and onions with a splash of apple cider vinegar. That'll brighten things up. I'll toss these around. The apples are so nice and smushy. And I wanna make sure that the juices kind of get all up and mingle with the apples and the onions. Now I just have to carve up my chickens. And I'm gonna start with their legs and thighs. Next, I'm gonna cut off the breast. And now I'm gonna cut the breast into 3 pieces so that everybody gets a piece of skin.
My apple pie bars are kind of a mashup between apple pie and shortbread bars. So I've got 1 pound of butter. Okay, the next thing is 3/4 cup of sugar. 1/2 cup of brown sugar. I use light brown sugar. 2 teaspoons of vanilla. Now the really important thing here is that the butter is at room temperature. So when you mix it, it gets nice and light and fluffy, and then you can add the other ingredients. You want to start it slow, and then gradually increase it. And what I've done is sift together 4 cups of flour, it's all-purpose flour, and 1½ teaspoons of kosher salt. I sifted them to make sure that they got really well combined. And now I'm just gonna add them slowly to the mixture. And what I do is I turn the mixture down low, and rather than dump the whole thing in, which means it probably won't mix in well, I'm just gonna do this slowly. Okay. Perfect. So this is really what you want it to look like. You want it to be soft and light and fluffy, but it will also hold together. And so if it doesn't do that, just add a teaspoon of water. First, I grease the bottom so it'll stick. And I want to be able to lift this whole thing out when I'm done. So I put parchment paper in, but I don't want it to fall into the pan. So I just take little metal clips, make sure there's no plastic on it, and just clip this piece of parchment paper right to the pan. Voila. So now I've got the shortbread dough, and I'm going to put 2/3 of it in the bottom of the pan. And then with floured hands, which is the best way to spread this out, I'm just going to spread it out into the pan. So I just want an even layer. This is my little trick. I take a metal baking cup and I flour the bottom. And so with a cup, you can kind of press it into the corner. Okay, So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna refrigerate this for 20 minutes, then I'm gonna bake it 375 for about 18 to 20 minutes until it's golden brown and delicious. And then I'm gonna cool it. Happily, I've got one already done. How good does that look? It's incredible. I combined 1.5 pounds each of sliced Granny Smith apples and Golden Delicious apples. I added 2 tablespoons of freshly squeezed lemon juice to stop the apples from browning, 1/4 cup of granulated sugar, then some classic apple pie spices, a teaspoon of ground cinnamon, 1/8 teaspoon of ground nutmeg, and mixed it all together. Then I added the apples to a pot containing 4 tablespoons of melted butter and let it simmer for 15 minutes, just until the apples were tender. That was pretty easy, right? Okay, so what I'm gonna do with the apples is I'm gonna spread them out on the shortbread crust. So there's just a little bit like a 1/2 inch border around the edge. Okay, so that's it for the apples. So I have 1/3 of the shortbread left in the mixer. I'm just gonna add a few things to give it even more flavor and crunch. So 1/2 cup of chopped walnuts, a teaspoon of ground cinnamon, the mixer back on, just enough on a low speed just to get it all mixed together. Okay, last little bit. How good does this look? Okay, next I'm gonna show you how I bake, cut, and serve the bars. The pan goes into a 375-degree oven for 25 to 30 minutes. Then when the time's up and the topping is browned, I'll take them out and let them cool completely. Then use the parchment to lift the slab out of the pan onto a board. Slide the paper out, then cut it into 12 squares with a large, sharp knife. I just serve the bars right on the cutting board. I love the way it looks. So that's apple pie bars. Apple pie in the form of a bar. Who wouldn't want to eat that? I do.
I am making my apple pancake, which is saucy and gooey with crispy caramelized edges. It's basically a caramel apple in Dutch baby form. To get started, I'm peeling a Honeycrisp apple. I love Honeycrisp apples because they're so sweet and also sturdy. I really try to avoid peeling apples whenever possible, but I do feel like not having the peel here makes a difference with the texture of the pancake. I'll slice this into 1/4 inch slices. And I'll toss these with some lemon juice, which will prevent them from turning brown. I'll set these aside while I get going on my caramel sauce. I'll heat up a skillet. This is an oven-safe skillet since eventually it's gonna be going into the oven. I'll melt a couple of tablespoons of butter and add a 1/4 cup of maple syrup. Maple syrup is so nice in the fall. And you've gotta have syrup on a pancake. And 1/2 cup of brown sugar. 3/4 teaspoon of cinnamon and a good pinch of salt necessary for any caramel. I'll stir this around and let everything come together and the sugar melts. Okay, the caramel is starting to bubble. I'm gonna add the apples. All right, I'll fold these in and let them start to soften. I'll stick this in the oven at 450 degrees for about 5 minutes while I whip up my pancake batter. A key component to an excellent apple pancake, eggs. It makes the batter custardy and rich and irresistible. I've got 4 of them here, and I'm gonna build the batter right in my measuring cup. I'm adding 2 tablespoons of sugar, and I'll give this a vigorous whisk. I want that sugar to really dissolve. Okay, next I'll get 1/3 cup of flour. Not a whole lot of flour, but this isn't your typical thick, fluffy pancake. It's more dense. 1/2 cup of buttermilk, a little vanilla, some nutmeg. Nutmeg is a nice friend for apples. Some cinnamon, and lastly, some kosher salt. And I'll whisk this until it's smooth. That smells heavenly. Okay, I'm gonna get my apples out of the oven. I could smell this all day. I'm gonna pour my pancake batter in. I'm gonna start by going around the edges so I can build the sides of the pancake and then work my way in toward the center. It helps give it that Dutch baby shape. It doesn't need to be perfect. This is a very rustic pancake. I'll get this back in the oven. It's still at 450 degrees for 18 to 20 minutes until the sides have risen and the edges are dark. Oh. Oh my gosh, look at it. It's so pretty. I love you. Okay, I'm not taking my gloves off because this handle is hot. I'm going to carefully invert it onto my serving plate. Here I go. Oh yeah, that is saucy. It's so gooey. Oh, but it needs flaky salt. That is one rustic pancake.
So for dessert, I'm gonna make an apple cake tatin, which is a very simple version of a French apple tatin. So first I'm gonna make caramel, which is a cup of sugar, a third of a cup of water, and I'm just gonna cook it. I need a candy thermometer to make sure I don't overcook it, until it's sort of brown and caramelized, about 360 degrees on a candy thermometer. Excellent. Okay, the next thing is the apples. So just cut the apples, cut out the core, and cut them in wedges. And I think for this, probably 3 wedges, so you'll have 12 wedges per apple. Okay, just take the apples and put them in a greased pan. A glass 9-inch pie pan is perfect. You can find one in the hardware store. And just run the apples around the outside. And then when you turn it over, all those caramelized apples are gonna show. It's gonna be great. You want to get them in tight. Okay, now for the gorgeous syrup. Smell it, smells great. I'm just going to pour it right over the apples. Now I'm going to make a sour cream cake dough on top and bake the whole thing together. It's going to be so good. So it's a really simple cake. 6 tablespoons of butter. 3/4 of a cup of sugar. Just cream that together. 2 eggs. Okay, next ingredients are 1/3 of a cup of sour cream. Okay, 1/2 teaspoon of lemon zest. 1/2 teaspoon of good vanilla extract. And mix it all up. So now for the dry ingredients. I need a cup plus 2 tablespoons of all-purpose flour. I need a 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder. 1/4 teaspoon of salt. I'm just going to sift these all together. And that way, if there's a little piece of flour or something in the bottom, you can either sieve it or just take it out. So make sure that you really have smooth, dry ingredients. So with the mixer on low, I'm just going to slowly add the dry ingredients. Okay, now just take the batter and just spread it out over the apples and the caramel. And it's going to be puffed and golden and just gorgeous when you turn it out upside down. Spread it out smoothly on top of the caramel and the apples. And then I'm going to bake it 350 degrees for about 30 to 40 minutes until the cake is done and a cake tester comes out clean. So this is the hard part, is turning it out. It's caramelized apples on the bottom and a nice light cake on the top. So wish me luck. Oh, look how great that looks. Wow. So you just have to loosen it a little bit. And I think I did it. Wow, that's really great. Okay, and a little bit of powdered sugar.
So I've got the chicken breasts here, and they're boneless, skinless when you get these from the grocery store. And if you got some in your freezer, go ahead and take them out, thaw them, and give this recipe a go. It's super simple. We're gonna go ahead and just season them right here in the paper with a little salt. Let me get some pepper really quick and get my pan on and get it ready for some oil. I'm just gonna sear off the chicken breasts in some oil once I season with some salt and pepper. And then we're gonna start adding some flavor, and that's gonna be the apple cider. Now, apple cider pops up a lot in my recipes, especially when chicken's involved. Usually when I fry chicken, I love to brine it overnight in some salt water, and then I'll throw in a little bit of the apple cider as well to give it some sweetness. So just a little bit of salt, and a lot of salt right there on the top. And then flip them over and make sure you season both sides. What good is seasoning just the top? You're gonna eat the whole thing, aren't you? All right, a little bit of salt. And then some pepper. Yeah, you'll find a lot of the meats can really take on sweetness, and boy, does chicken do it, and pork as well. So definitely gonna put some apple cider in here and bring it to life. All right, so that's it. Salt and pepper, it's all seasoned up. We're gonna get it into our pan right here with the oil and just sear it on both sides. Now the trick to searing, don't move it, just kind of let it sit right there. Get some contact, love with the hot pan. All right, that's gonna sear up for a second. Ooh-wee, look at the sear on those chicken breasts. We are making my Southern square meal today. Some chicken breasts we're gonna saute in apple cider. Remember, that's just salt and pepper down on those breasts. Get them nice and seared so the juice stays in when we hit them with all that other flavor in a minute. Now, what we're gonna put into our saute pan with the chicken is gonna be some onion, garlic, of course, bay leaf, and remember I told you how I love apples with chicken. We're gonna put some apple in there and some apple cider. So what I've gotta do now is get them all ready for the pan. All right, so that's gonna go into this same sauteed pan that we seared our chicken off. Look at how beautiful and golden brown that is. It's amazing with those big old coarse chunks of black pepper. I like it that way. So veggies go in. Remember, we just had a little bit of vegetable oil in here so we could saute away. Those apples are gonna get nice and tender and marry so well with the apple cider we're gonna put in here in a minute. Come on, apple wedges. Get a little wooden spoon out so I can move it around. And look, this is how you build some flavor for your chicken. Look at all those brown bits from the searing we did. It's gonna put some taste on these onions. And if you feel the need to put a little bit more oil on, go right ahead because you never know how much fat's gonna render out of your chicken breast, but just a little bit. Don't drown it. Yeah, that is looking good. To add some flour to the thyme and onions and apples and everything that's in this pan that we're gonna saute and finish the chicken off with. Now the flour is great because it's gonna thicken up the apple cider that's gonna make this lovely gravy. All right, but what we wanna do really is work that flour out so it's not all flour tasting. It's looking like the flour's cooking down a little bit here off of our apples, onions, garlic, flavor galore. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna get some apple cider out. And what I wanna do is just pour that right into your pan. Remember the flour in it's gonna make a really nice gravy for you. And all of that brown goodness on the bottom of your pan from searing off your chicken breasts, you wanna go ahead and just start scraping away. And that's called deglazing. Now what I wanna do is just get these chicken breasts back in. Remember, skinless, boneless, get them from the grocery store like that, your little store-bought shortcut. And then we seared them off in this pan with just a little bit of oil, salt and pepper on both sides. Look at how beautiful they are. Now they're not completely cooked through, just seared so we can keep them nice and juicy. So what we wanna do is kinda let them simmer in here for about 10, 15 more minutes. If you're a little worried, you can cover it up, but I'm not worried at all. Hey, it is almost time to eat. I'm just giving myself a nice little presentation. Our chicken breast that we seared and then sauteed in that lovely gravy. This is what I have right here. Just gonna take it off and get it right onto my plate and ready for all the lovely moisture we're gonna put into it with that lovely apple cider gravy that we made. All right, so now this is ready to get dressed. I'm gonna hook it up with some of this right here. Now remember, this has the apples in it, the thyme. We thickened it with the flour. Not gonna taste it because we let that cook out. Look at how yummy that is. The onions and the garlic. This is gonna be so good. All right, so there we have that. And this is gonna be so yummy and moist. Remember, we bought this, no skin, no bones, not a lot of work. Get some of this gravy on there. Look at that. The best part is how sweet it is. We put the apple wedges in, then we sauteed it with the apple cider. This is a winner right here. You gotta try this dish.
When I was testing my fresh apple spice cake, I wanted to be really sure that every ingredient earned its place in the recipe. So I'm starting with raisins, 1 cup of raisins. And instead of regular raisins, I'm using golden raisins. I think they're a little sweeter and they're gonna look great in the cake. I'm adding ½ a cup of dark rum, and I use dark rum instead of regular white rum because it's got sort of like a caramelly flavor, and it'll be great with the apples. So I'm gonna pour it over the raisins. And now what I'm gonna do to make them all taste better, I'm gonna microwave them so the raisins plump up and the rum gets into the raisins. 60 seconds. Okay, let's make the cake. So the cake starts with 1 cup of sugar, granulated sugar, and 1 cup of dark brown sugar. And again, the dark brown sugar has a little molasses in it, so that enhances the flavor of the cake. 3 eggs, extra large eggs, and instead of butter, I'm using oil because it keeps it really moist. 3/4 of a cup of vegetable oil. You want some kind of flavorless oil for this. Okay, 2 teaspoons of vanilla, because of course I love vanilla. And 2 teaspoons of freshly grated orange zest. Just think of all these, raisins are ready. Just think how all these flavors are so delicious together with apple. Just gives it much more flavor. Okay, then turn this on and beat it for about 3 minutes until it's light and fluffy. Okay, next the dry ingredients. So I've got a bowl and a sifter. I always like to do the dry ingredients in a sifter. 2½ cups of all-purpose flour, 2 teaspoons of baking powder. Want a nice light cake, and that's what the baking powder does. So the sifter is a great way to mix everything and make sure it's really smooth. 2 teaspoons of cinnamon. So these are all kind of apple pie spices. I'm making apple cake. I just thought I want them to have those kinds of spices. Okay, ½ a teaspoon of ground nutmeg, ½ a teaspoon of ground ginger. Next is cloves. Cloves are really strong, so I'm just gonna do 1/8 of a teaspoon, just a little bit, and ½ a teaspoon of salt. You know, salt is usually considered savory, but even in sweet things, it brings out the flavors of things. Okay, so that's the flour and the spices. I'm just gonna sift them all together. This smells great. It does smell like apple pie. And see, anything that's in the sifter, just wanna make sure it goes through. Okay, so now, I'm just gonna turn this to low and just very slowly add the dry ingredients to the wet ingredients. When I had Bear for Contessa, we used to have all kinds of cakes like this out on the bakery counter. And you could come buy a whole cake, but you could also buy a piece. So there were loaves that you could have a slice from, or a square cake that you could have a square piece from. Just makes it really accessible. It's nice. Not fancy, just really delicious and earthy. And you always want to come back for more. Okay, just add it slowly so it gets mixed in. No one wants big lumps of flour in their cake. Vegetable oil makes this such an easy batter. You don't have to wait for the butter to come to room temperature. Okay, that's the dry ingredients. So now I have all kinds of good stuff to put into it. Clean hands are a cook's best tools. Take everything off the beater. You don't want to lose any of the batter. Okay, now I'm just going to give it a big stir with a spatula just to make sure it's really well mixed from the bottom and the sides. Now I'm going to add some really good stuff. First the raisins, and I have to drain them. The smell of the raisins and the rum is fantastic. So I'm just going to drain the raisins. A lot of the rum has gotten into the raisins, so it flavored them and plumped them up, but I don't want too much liquid. Otherwise, the cake won't rise. Now I'm just going to fold the raisins and the rum that have been soaked into them right into the batter. Next, I have some pecans that I've toasted. It's 1 cup of pecans, chopped. I just toasted them for about 5 to 10 minutes, 350 degrees, just to crisp them up and bring out the flavor. I want everything to taste as good as it can possibly be. And then 1½ pounds of Granny Smith apples that have been peeled, cored, and 1/4 inch diced. Just right in. Granny Smith are really important because that tartness is really good for this cake. So there's sweet things and tart things and fresh things and roasted things, and it's so good. And the texture of this is amazing. So I'm just gonna fold these together, Make sure everything's really well folded in because you want every bite to have raisins, pecans, and apples in it. And the good thing is you can make it ahead. It only gets better. Okay, so instead of making a round cake or a loaf cake, I'm gonna make a rectangular cake. And this pan, I've greased it, I've put parchment paper in, and then greased and floured the pan. I wanna make sure it comes out of the pan. I'm just gonna pour the whole batter in. Look how good this looks. Isn't that crazy? You can really see how all the flavors of the raisins and the apples and the pecans are gonna make this fantastic. Okay, I wanna get every last drop. That's why spatulas are the best things in the kitchen. Okay, I'm just gonna spread this out. Look how thick it is. I have to say I can smell the rum. Okay, ready for the oven. I'm gonna bake the cake at 350 degrees for 35 minutes. When the time's up, I'll take it out, let it cool in the pan, then I'll flip it out onto my hand, carefully remove the parchment paper, place it on a board, and cut it in big squares. That looks amazing, doesn't it? And with a cup of tea in the afternoon, it's a perfect snack. But if you want to make a great dessert out of it, I'll show you what I do. So I'm going to take a piece of the cake, put it on a big plate, a little more dramatic. Some vanilla ice cream. I actually took it out of the freezer, put it into the fridge for about 30 minutes so it's nice and softened. Softened ice cream has so much more flavor than frozen hard ice cream. Okay, big scoop on the plate, just like that. And not to leave well enough alone, I have some warm caramel sauce, store-bought. You don't have to make your own caramel sauce. And a drizzle of caramel sauce on the cake and the plate. Very restaurant style, but so easy to do. And I would say that's a dessert that everybody is gonna be very happy to try, including me. I may have to try it just to make sure it's good. How great is that? Love all the flavors and the textures. Cold ice cream, warm cake, caramel sauce. Now, that's my kind of dessert. So good. The textures, that's just delicious. I'm going back in.
It's my apple cheddar and brie grilled cheese, right? It's like, starting with the bread, we got some cranberry walnut bread, right from the loaf. Fresh, right from the bakery.
Artisanal bread.
Beautiful. The first thing I like to do before I start building my grilled cheese, right? It may seem sacrilege, but I like to spread butter, room temperature butter, on the outside. And how are we spreading this, kids?
Crust to crust.
Is a must, always, right? Just enough to coat it.
Why is that? Because
some people just drop the butter in the pan.
Oh, okay, I've
right?
done
And then
that.
you burn up the butter, you brown half the butter or whatever. And this way you get all the butter you need, full coverage, right? So you get that golden brown crust that we all love to. So I'm gonna get going with this one, starting with some very sharp cheddar cheese. Right, love it. Now I'm holding it like this so I don't get the butter on the board. You see as I'm doing here? Next, you take 3 slices of Granny Smith apples.
And your bread, might I add, is thin sliced bread.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's not regulation.
It's not regulation. Next, watch this. I'm just gonna kind of keep it like that. We got some of my favorite ingredient on the planet. Nice little kind of tang and heat you need with this. Some cherry pepper relish, right? So this is gonna go on this end. And we're gonna spread this ever so gingerly. Again, crust to crust. So every bite, you get a little, it packs that punch, right? Now, of course, this is not in a lot of grilled cheeses these days, but I'm putting it on mine since it is fall.
Add
the
it.
funkiest, the funnest melting cheese, a little brie, 2 slices of that. And there you got the ingredients for the interior, right? We got the flavor inside that bread with the cranberry. So you got sweetness, you got spice, you got butter, you got sharp cheddar, you got funky brie, you got spicy. What temperature do we cook grilled cheeses at, right?
I'm doing medium high.
Medium low, actually. So this is going right on there. Gentle sizzle. And to help mimic that dome, like we do at the diner, we're just gonna do a nice little lid on this, right? And we're just gonna let it kind of very low, like medium low, almost touching low, okay? We're gonna flip it once, put the lid back on. How do we know it's done? The inside looks gooey. It looks ready to go. But another thing you can do to help expedite it, and I've done this in this pan, is that you could do it in 2 seconds.
Jed.
Right, so I just want to show you guys. It's not cheating, right? If you're doing 4 sandwiches, obviously do it this way. But if you're just doing 2 or 1, this way you can kind of get everything nice and toasty in the middle. So we can sit there.
Oh, look at that bread.
Beautiful. We'll let this- that's it right there, right? So every great sandwich needs a great sauce or dipping thing. Yeah, so we got some great stone ground Dijon mustard. Add a little honey to this and just a little mayonnaise. Quick pantry pull right from the fridge, and you make a creamy honey Dijon, which also pairs so nice with this. And we can put this right in a little sidecar here so we can dip it in. Look at that. So easy.
So I've got the apples, they look gorgeous from the farm, and now I'm just gonna make pie crust. I don't know why, but I think people find pie crust more daunting than anything else that we make. I'm gonna show you the secret of really good pie crust, and it's about very cold ingredients. So I'm gonna start with 3 cups of flour, just regular all-purpose flour. Tablespoon of sugar. And 1 teaspoon of salt. I use kosher salt. Now for the shortening. There are all kinds of debates about what kind of shortening to use for pie crust, but I actually combine vegetable shortening, and I do it very cold. It comes out of the refrigerator. And butter. And then you get all of the flakiness of the vegetable shortening and all the flavor of the butter. So that's 1/3 cup of vegetable shortening. And I have 1½ sticks of cold butter that I've diced, and I actually put it back in the refrigerator until I was ready. So it's really cold. Put that right in. And now comes the critical part. What you want in the dough is little bits of butter and shortening through the dough. You don't want it totally pureed. And that's what makes it flaky. When the heat from the oven hits the butter, it causes steam to evaporate, and that's what makes it really flaky. So when you're doing this, make sure it's not totally pureed in the flour. I'm just gonna pulse this about 8 times until it's like the size of peas. Maybe 10 times. So you can still see bits of butter and shortening in the flour. And that's what's going to make really flaky pastry. I'm going to do maybe 1 more pulse. Okay, so the next thing is ice water. And I need about 8 tablespoons, which is about 1/2 cup. So I'm going to pour out the ice. Excellent. So I'm going to turn this on. And just let it go around until it forms a ball. Okay, we're there. So now I'm going to refrigerate it for about 30 minutes. It's a really important part of making good pie pastry. Okay, now for the filling. Deep dish apple pie. 4 pounds of apples cut up in big chunks, and I'm going to flavor it with a little bit of orange zest and lemon zest. 1 tablespoon of orange juice, and 2 tablespoons of lemon juice. This not only flavors it, but it keeps the apples from turning brown. 1/2 cup of sugar. It all depends on how sweet the apples are. These are pretty tart. 1/4 cup of flour. And a teaspoon of salt. Okay, now for the spices. 3/4 of a teaspoon of good cinnamon. 1/2 teaspoon of good nutmeg. I love the way it smells. It smells like apple pie spices already. Okay, 1/8 of a teaspoon of allspice, which is really a pinch. And then I'm just going to mix it all up. And then right into the crust. This is a lot of apples for this pie crust, but I like it when it's piled high. Mile high apple pie. Okay, now for the top crust. Ready for the pie. Roll it up on the rolling pin. And roll it really gently over the apples. There's so many different ways to crimp a pie. I think everybody likes to do it the way their mother did it. But what I like to do is just roll the top crust underneath the bottom one. I want to make this really old-fashioned looking. Okay, once that's done, you can either crimp it with a fork. Crimping is about keeping the two crusts together so it seals in the juices, or you can do it with your fingers. I think I'll do it with my fingers. Okay, crimped. Now, I'm going to do an egg wash. It's going to make the crust really nice and brown, which is 1 egg beaten with about a tablespoon of water or milk or whatever you have. Just brush the whole top. Okay, a little bit of sugar, make it nice and shiny. And then just a few holes in the top to let the steam escape so the crust gets nice and crisp. Sort of old-fashioned. Okay, into the oven, 400 degrees for about an hour and 15 minutes. Now that's an apple pie. And my favorite part is it makes the house smell fabulous.
I'm making a big apple crumb cheesecake with this really incredible crumb on top with apples. So in this bowl here, I have 15 graham crackers that I have crushed. I've added 3 tablespoons of brown sugar. I'm adding 6 tablespoons of melted butter. So this is a classic graham cracker crust, and a 1/4 teaspoon salt to kind of enhance that brown sugar. It's buttery and it's really, really good. The thing about making a really great crust, you have to make sure that it's super buttery. Otherwise, if it's kind of dry, it'll just fall apart when you cut it, and that butter does that. This looks great. I have a 9-inch spring-form pan sprayed with non-stick spray, and that crust will pop right out of there. Just gonna use my fingers to press the crust down evenly. There's nothing like a homemade cheesecake. Once you learn how to perfect a cheesecake, I promise you it'll become second nature, and it's something that you'll always want to do. I have my oven preheated to 350. I'm gonna bake it for 6 to 10 minutes, then get started on my apple crumb topping. For the topping, I'm adding 1½ cups of all-purpose flour, 1/2 cup of light brown sugar, a teaspoon of cinnamon, 1/2 cup of butter, that's about 1 stick, and a 1/4 teaspoon of kosher salt. Oh, I smell that cinnamon and that butter. It's a crumb, so once it bakes, it's gonna get really, really crunchy and super buttery. I'm just mixing this diced Granny Smith apple in here, and trust me, you don't have to worry about if your pieces are equal. It's all gonna go on top of this cheesecake, and it's gonna look fabulous when it comes out the oven. I smell that crust. Let's check on it. It's nice and golden brown, and it smells incredible. Gonna let it cool right here and get started on my filling. All right, so I have room temperature cream cheese. You don't want big chunks, and the way to prevent that is to make sure that your cream cheese is softened, okay? 1 cup room temp sour cream, vanilla extract, about 2 teaspoons. I'm using 3 whole eggs and the yolk of 1 egg, so 4 eggs altogether, 1 at a time. And that's just to make sure that the eggs are thoroughly incorporated in your filling. 2nd egg. And the yolk of the 4th egg. Now I'm adding in 2 tablespoons of cornstarch and 1 cup of sugar. My crust has cooled down, and it's okay to add my filling now. I'm taking my topping, and I'm just gonna put it gently on the filling. Don't worry if some of it sinks in the middle there. Once it bakes, it'll pop right back up. I have the oven preheated to 350. I'm gonna bake it for 60 minutes. Once it's done, I'm gonna turn the oven off. Let it sit in the oven with the door cracked for an additional 60 minutes. Take it out, let it sit for about an hour in the fridge, and I promise you, you're gonna have the best cheesecake you've ever tasted.
One of Jeffrey's and my all-time favorite desserts is French apple tart. And the amazing thing about it is, it looks really complicated. It is so easy, you won't believe it. You really can make it at home. So I'm starting with 4 Granny Smith apples. You can really use any apples, but you want them to be very crisp and tart. I'm just gonna cut them in half. And I use a melon baller to take out the center core. And then just use your knife to take out this little bit of core. All you want is just apple, just like that. And I'll show you how to cut it. So I'm just gonna slice this very thinly, about 1/4 inch thick. Try and keep them as uniform as you can. Small, sharp knife. And now I have the pastry chilling. I chilled the pastry in the refrigerator. It's really important to let it rest. I know pastry sounds daunting, but this one really is easy. I'll show you how I did it. I make it in the food processor. First, 2 cups of all-purpose flour, then a half a teaspoon of salt, and a tablespoon of sugar. Pulse it a few times just to combine. Next, 12 tablespoons of diced cold unsalted butter. Remember, ice cold butter is the key to really good pastry. That gets pulsed until the butter is just the size of peas. Then, with the motor running, add a half a cup of ice water and pulse it just until the dough comes together. Tip it onto a board. Knead it really quickly. You don't want it to warm up. Then wrap it in plastic and refrigerate it for at least an hour. I'm just gonna roll it out now. A little flour. So I'm gonna roll this out to about 10 by 14 inches. Just roll it from the middle. It's the best way to roll pastry. Okay, it's just gonna go right onto a sheet pan, parchment paper, the easiest way to do it. Roll it up right around your rolling pin and just lay it right on the pan. I'm gonna take one of the apples. I'm just gonna fan these out. Just layer them one on top of the next. You can do it any way you like. You can do it sideways. I like to do it diagonally across. I just think it's prettier. I love the simplicity of this. There's no filling. It's just pastry and apples, butter and sugar. You can do it with peaches or you can do it with pears, but I have to say my favorite is apples. And if you do it with other fruit, you want them to be really firm. You don't want them too juicy, otherwise you'll end up with a mess in your oven. Okay, that's the apples. Now some sugar. Half a cup of sugar. I know this seems like a lot of sugar for a small tart, but what it's going to do is caramelize the apples. It's going to mix with the juices of the apples when it bakes, and it's going to be just fantastic. So believe me, you need to use the whole half a cup. Okay, now some really ice cold butter. About a half a stick of butter, and it's chopped up in small dice. And I'm just going to distribute it, and it's going to mix with the sugar. So, cut it in quarters, and then just dice it. So just distribute it on top. It doesn't have to be perfect or exact. Just make sure it's well distributed. 450 degrees, which is a hot oven, 45 minutes, and it'll be golden brown and delicious. If the edges burn a little bit, don't worry, that's what it's going to do. So the next thing is a classic apricot glaze for the tart. It gives it a really nice finish. So I'm going to take about a half a cup of apricot jam. If you can find apricot jelly, it's even easier, but I can never find it. I'm just going to put some in a pan. It doesn't have to be an exact amount. I'm just going to heat it up with about 2 tablespoons of Calvados. Don't go out and buy a bottle of Calvados if you don't have some. It's a nice apple flavor liqueur, just enough to thin it. I'm just going to heat this up until it's melted. I'm really looking for sort of a runny consistency. When the jam melts, it's going to be just right. I want something that's very easy to brush on the tart. Okay, this should be good. So I just have a sieve and a bowl. I'm going to pour this right into the sieve. I can really smell the warm Calvados. It smells so good. And just strain it through. And that's the glaze.